I have told this story maybe 40 times now, to my own brood, to recruits who weren't even hatched when it happened, to officers who outrank me and still lean in close when I get to the part about her hand. And every single time somebody stops me and says the same thing. They say that can't be true. They say you must be exaggerating. They say no creature that small could do what you are describing. And I tell them what I always tell them. I was there. I stood 11 meters away. I felt it in my chest plate before I understood it with my eyes. Her name was Maya Cole, and before she was anything else, before the recordings, before they renamed the Eastern Combat Hall after her, she was the joke. She was the thing we laughed at to feel better about our own fear. Let me start at the beginning because the beginning matters. If you only hear the end, you will think she was special from birth. She wasn't. That is the whole point. That is the part that should frighten you. My name is Tavan Rise. I am of the Select people, 4th Clutch, Low Ridge. We are tall and thin, built like the reeds that grow on our homeworld, and we are proud of our reach and our reflexes the way some species are proud of their armor or their venom. When the Coalition Academy opened its doors to the new member species, my parent line spent everything they had to get me a placement. Select do not get many chances at the high orbital track. I knew, walking up the boarding ramp at 15 of your years old, that I was carrying the hopes of people who would never see a star up close. So when I say I understand what it feels like to be small in a big place, please believe me. I do. But understanding it and living it are not the same animal. The Academy itself sits in a slow orbit around a dead gas giant the old records simply call Ward. There is no proper name for it because nobody important ever lived there. It is just a place far enough from everything that an accident won't kill a city. That is the truth of training stations. They put you where the explosions won't matter. The first thing you notice when you arrive is the light. It comes through the long curved windows in a thin blue-gray that never quite turns to morning and never quite becomes night. You learn to tell time by the chime system instead of by your eyes, and for the first several cycles, your body fights it, and you lie awake in your bunk feeling like a creature that has been pulled out of its proper season. The second thing you notice is the smell, recycled air, metal. The faint sour note of 40 different species breathing in the same corridors, each of us giving off something the others find slightly wrong. You stop smelling it after a while, but the first week it sits in the back of your throat and reminds you that you are far from anything that grew from soil. And the third thing you notice, the thing that actually matters for this story, is the humans. They had been part of the coalition for less than a generation. Most of us had never seen one in the flesh. We had seen the briefing reels, of course, everyone had. The reels showed humans as a young species, recently spacefaring, technologically clever but biologically unremarkable, soft-skinned. No natural armor, no claws worth the name, no venom, average reach. The reels were polite about it, the way you are polite about a child who is trying very hard. They used words like promising and adaptable. Among ourselves in the bunks, we used different words. I am not proud of the words we used. There were 6 humans in my intake year. Out of nearly 400 cadets, 6. They kept mostly to themselves at first, which we read as weakness, because that is how young creatures read everything. We did not consider that they might be lonely. We did not consider that they were 6 against 400, on a station that smelled wrong to them too, eating food that their bodies could barely process, sleeping in a light that was not their sun. Of the 6, Maya Cole was the smallest. I want to be careful here, because memory likes to make things into legends, and she was not a legend then. She was a person. She was, in human terms, perhaps a little under average height for her kind. With dark hair she kept tied back tight and a way of looking at things sideways before she looked at them straight, as if she was checking whether they were going to lie to her. She had a scar on her left forearm, thin and old, the kind you stop noticing on yourself. Her uniform never quite fit because the quartermaster's templates were built for broader frames, and so the shoulders always sat a little loose on her, which made her look even smaller, even younger, even more like someone who had wandered into the wrong life. She was quiet, not shy. There is a difference, and it took me an embarrassingly long time to learn it. Shy is when you have nothing to say. Quiet is when you have decided that what you have to say is not for the people in front of you. Maya was the second kind. She watched everything and offered almost nothing, and we mistook her silence for stupidity because we were young and stupid ourselves. The trouble started in the physical evaluations. You have to understand how the academy worked. Everything was ranked. Everything was posted. Every cycle, the standings went up on the long board outside the central commons, and 400 young creatures from 40 worlds crowded around it to find their names and feel either the warm flush of pride or the cold drop of shame. It was brutal by design. The instructors believed that a soldier who could not handle public failure could not handle private fear, and there is a hard logic in that, even if it broke some of us. The physical evaluations were where the humans fell apart. At least, that is how it looked. There was a Korthan named Brask in our intake, and Brask was the kind of cadet the recruiting reels are made for. Korthans are big. Not just tall, big, layered in dense muscle under a hide like cured leather, with a low center of gravity and a temper they were always being told to manage. Brask could lift loads that made the rest of us step back. In the first strength evaluation, he posted a number that broke the intake record. And the standings went up, and there he was at the top. And there, at the very bottom, below even a Select like me who has no business at the top of any strength chart, was Maya Cole. I remember the commons that cycle. I remember the laughter. It moved through the crowd like a current, and I remember being grateful that it was not pointed at me, and I remember laughing too, because laughing with the current is so much easier than standing against it. Somebody said, "How did that even get in?" Somebody else said, "Charity placement. They have to take a few of every species now." And a Korthan, one of Brask's circle, said the thing that stuck. He said, it would break its own arm trying to open a ration tin. And the laughter doubled, and I saw Maya at the edge of the crowd, and she had heard it, and she did not flinch, and she did not argue. She just looked at the board for a long moment, the way you look at a wound to decide how bad it is, and then she walked away. That was the day the name started, the Laughingstock. It spread the way cruel names do, fast and sticky, until even cadets who had never spoken to her used it. Even some of the instructors, in the way instructors do when they think the cadets aren't listening, started to write her off. There is a particular sound an instructor makes when they look at a name on a roster and decide it is not worth their attention. It is a small exhale. I heard several of them make it about Maya. Here is the thing nobody understood, and the thing I only understood much later, when it was almost too late to matter. The strength evaluations were testing the wrong thing. They were testing raw output. Lift this, carry that, push against the resistance plate until the meter stops climbing, and against raw output against a Korthan or a Vasier or any of the heavy worlder species, a human will always lose. Always. Their muscles are not built for it. Their frames are not built for it. On a chart of how much can you move right now, in a single explosive effort, Maya Cole belonged at the bottom, and the chart was honest about that. But there are other charts. There are charts the Academy did not yet know how to draw. I started to notice the first one in the endurance trials, maybe 40 cycles into the term. The endurance trials were a misery for everyone. You ran the long perimeter track of the station's outer ring, which was just under 4 kilometers around, in full kit, as many laps as you could manage before your body gave out. Most cadets posted strong numbers for the first 3 or 4 laps and then collapsed in a heap, proud and broken, and the instructors scraped them off the deck and recorded the count. Brask did 6 laps and had to be carried to the medical bay, where they put him on a recovery line for 2 cycles. 6 was an outstanding number. Everyone said so. Maya Cole did 11. I was there at the end of it. A small group of us had gathered not to cheer her, you understand, but because it was strange. It was wrong. The Laughingstock should have quit at lap 2. That was the script. Instead, she just kept going, lap after lap, not fast, but never stopping, her breath coming in long, controlled pulls, her face running with the salt water humans produce when they overheat, her loose shoulders set in a line that did not change. By lap 8, the crowd had stopped laughing. By lap 10, nobody was talking at all. By lap 11, she was the only cadet still on the track, and the whole outer ring had gone silent except for the sound of her boots and her breathing. And when she finally stopped, she did not collapse. She put her hands on her knees and she breathed, and then she stood up straight and walked off the track on her own 2 feet. It did not change the standings. The endurance trial counted for almost nothing in the overall ranking, by some old weighting formula that valued the explosive evaluations far more. So her name stayed at the bottom of the board that mattered, and the joke stayed alive. But something had shifted in me. I had seen something the chart could not show, and I could not unsee it. I found out later what it was. A medical officer explained it to me years after when I asked her to help me understand. She said the thing about humans that nobody had wanted to put in the recruiting reels because it did not photograph well. She said, "They don't have the biggest output, they have the longest." She said human bodies were built on a homeworld with brutal heat and endless distances, and that their ancestors survived not by being the strongest hunters on the plain, but by being the ones who simply did not stop. She used a phrase I have never forgotten. She said humans were built to outlast, not to overpower. I did not know any of that then. I only knew that the smallest cadet in the intake had run until the rest of us were ashamed. The second thing I noticed came in the close quarters drills. These were combat exercises, hand to hand, no weapons, conducted on the training deck. And here, finally, you would think Maya would be exposed for good. Surely the joke would land hardest here, in the place where small, soft creatures get thrown around by big armored ones. The instructors paired us by random draw, and the pairings went up on a side board, and there was always a little ripple of dread or relief depending on who you drew. The cycle I am thinking of, Maya drew a Vossier named Het. Vossier are not as massive as Korthans, but they are fast and they fight dirty, with a culture that treats hesitation as the deepest shame. Het was good. Het had a reputation, and when the pairing went up, the bunks buzzed with the cruel anticipation of it, because everyone assumed they were about to watch the Laughingstock get folded in half. The training deck I should describe, because it is where everything ends. It is a wide circular floor, maybe 60 meters across, sunk a little below the observation gallery that rings it, so the watching cadets and instructors look down into it like spectators around a pit. The floor itself is the famous part. It is made of a layered composite the engineers call ferrolaminate, a sandwich of alloy plates and energy-dispersing gel and a top skin of dense ceramic, and it is rated, the plaque on the wall proudly says, to absorb impacts that would kill an unprotected creature outright. They demonstrated it to us in the first week. They dropped a 2-ton training drone onto it from the ceiling. The deck did not even mark. The whole point of the deck was that nothing a cadet could do would damage it. It was the immovable thing, the floor of the world. We trained on it precisely because it could take anything we had and give nothing back. Remember the deck, remember what it was for. So Maya stepped down into the pit to face Het, and she looked exactly as small as you would expect. Her loose-shouldered uniform, her tied-back hair, her sideways glance checking the Vossier over before she looked at him straight. The gallery was full. Word had spread that this might be the cycle the joke finally died, and nobody wanted to miss it. The instructor called the start. Het came in fast, the way Vossier do, all aggression and forward pressure, betting that the human would freeze. And Maya did something I had never seen any cadet do. She did not meet his charge and she did not run from it. She moved sideways, just barely, just enough, and she let his momentum carry him past her. And as he went by, she did something with her hip and her hands that I could not even follow, and Het went down onto the deck so hard the impact rang through the floor and up into the gallery rail under my hands. The whole hall went silent. She had not hit him. That was the strange part. She had not thrown a single strike. She had simply used the speed he gave her and folded it back against him. And now a Vossier who had never lost a close-quarters draw was lying on his back on the immovable deck with a small human standing over him, not gloating, not even breathing hard, just watching to see what he would do next. Het got up. He was furious, which is the worst thing a fighter can be, and he came in again, faster, sloppier, and she put him down again, harder this time, and the ring of the impact was louder. A third time, a fourth. Each time he gave her his speed and his rage, and each time she gave it back to him doubled, and not once did she throw a strike of her own. She was not beating him. She was letting him beat himself against her, like surf against a rock, and the rock does not get tired, and the rock does not get angry, and the surf does not understand why it keeps losing. The instructor called the match before Het could hurt himself badly, and the gallery did not laugh. For the first time since the strength evaluations, nobody laughed at Maya Cole. They just stared, and the silence had a new quality to it, a confused quality, the silence of a crowd that has been told a story its whole life and has just watched the story turn out to be wrong. But here is the cruelty of young creatures and the cruelty of charts. By the next cycle, the joke was back. Because the standings did not change. The close-quarters drills were scored on a point system that rewarded landed strikes, and Maya had landed none. She had won every exchange by using her opponent's force, which the scoring system simply could not see. It recorded the matches as draws or even as losses because the other fighter had been more aggressive. Her name stayed at the bottom of the board. And the cadets who needed the joke to be true, the ones for whom her existence at the bottom made their own anxious place in the middle feel safer, they grabbed onto the standings and waved them around. They said the Het match was luck. They said Vossier are over-aggressive anyway. Everyone knows that. She just got lucky he was stupid. They rebuilt the joke on top of the very thing that should have destroyed it. And Maya let them. That was the part I could not understand at the time. She had it in her power to argue, to point at the Het match, to demand the scoring be reviewed. She did none of that. She took the bottom slot on the board again, and she walked away from the commons with that same flat, unflinching look, and I started to realize that she was not staying quiet because she was beaten. She was staying quiet because she was deciding something. She was running some long endurance race in her own head that the rest of us could not see. And she had decided that arguing was a sprint she did not want to waste herself on. I did the thing I am most ashamed of around this time. I want to tell you about it because the story is not honest without it. There was a cycle when Brask and his circle cornered Maya in the equipment bay. I was there. I was on the edge of it, holding a kit pack, not part of the circle but not apart from it either, which is its own kind of cowardice. Brask was doing the thing big cadets do, standing too close, using his size like a wall, and he was saying the usual things, the ration tin things, the charity placement things, and his circle was laughing. And Maya was standing there with her back to a rack of stowed gear, and she was not afraid. I remember that clearly. She was not afraid. She was bored. She was looking at Brask the way you look at whether you have already decided to wait out. And Brask, who needed a reaction and was not getting one, picked up a training baton off the rack and pointed it at her chest and said, "What would you even do, little thing? If I really came at you, what would you do?" And Maya looked at the baton and looked at Brask, and she said the only full sentence I ever heard her say in those early cycles. She said, very quietly, "I'd be very careful not to break you." The circle howled at that. They thought it was the funniest thing they had ever heard, the Laughingstock threatening a Corthan, and the laughter rolled, and Brask laughed loudest of all because he had gotten his reaction. The laughter was the reaction, and that was enough for him. I laughed too. I want to be clear about that. I laughed too. I stood there with my kit pack and I laughed at her with the rest of them, because it was easier, because the current was strong, because I was 15 and far from home, and I needed to belong to something, and the something on offer was a circle that laughed at a small human in an equipment bay. She looked at me when I laughed. That is the part that has stayed with me for all the years since. She did not look at Brask, who was the threat. She did not look at the circle, who were the noise. She looked at me, the Selec on the edge, the one who was not even part of it, and she held my eyes for one long moment, and there was no anger in her face. There was something much worse than anger. There was recognition. As if she had me filed away exactly, as if she knew precisely what I was, which was a creature who would laugh along with cruelty rather than stand alone in silence. Then she looked away, and the moment was over, and the circle broke up, and I carried my kit packed to my bunk and lay awake in the blue-gray night, and felt sick with myself in a way I did not have words for yet. I tell you this so you understand that what happened on the deck was not a story about a hero and her admiring friend. It was a story about a creature who endured the worst of us with a patience that none of us deserved. I was not her friend. I was one of the ones who laughed, and I have spent a long time trying to earn the right to tell her story honestly, which means telling the part where I am not the hero of it. The cycles ground on. The standings went up. Maya stayed at the bottom of the board that counted and quietly broke every chart the board could not see. She ran the longest. She lasted the longest. In the survival module, when they cut the heat to the dormitory wing as a stress test, the heavy worlders shivered and complained, and one Korthan actually went into a kind of cold shock that put him in medical. And Maya Cole sat on her bunk wrapped in a single thin blanket and did her study work as if nothing was wrong, because human bodies, the medical officer told me later, are absurdly good at handling cold and heat both, far better than almost anything else in the coalition. Because their homeworld swung between extremes that would have killed most species in a season. We did not have a chart for that either. There is one more thing I have to tell you before we get to the deck, because without it you will not understand why she finally did what she did, and you will think it was about pride. It was not about pride. Maya Cole had no pride to wound, or rather, she had buried it so deep that no insult could reach it. What she had instead, what finally moved her, was something much harder to laugh at. About 2/3 of the way through the term, the academy ran what they called the cascade. It was the most dangerous exercise in the whole curriculum, the one the older cadets warned us about in low voices. It simulated a hull breach in a populated section of a ship. Pressure dropping, debris in motion, simulated casualties, the whole nightmare, run in a sealed environment chamber that was as close to the real thing as the academy could legally make it. The point of the cascade was to see how you behaved when the situation was genuinely beyond your control, when there was no winning, only managing, only choosing who and what you could save in the time you had. I was in the cascade group that cycle, so was Maya, so was Brask. And the thing about the cascade is that it was supposed to be controlled. The instructors swore it was controlled. Every variable accounted for, every danger simulated rather than real. The casualties were drones. The debris was on tracks. The pressure drop was real but bounded, never enough to actually hurt a cadet, just enough to frighten one. It was supposed to be controlled. I will tell you what happened in the cascade and what it revealed about Maya Cole and how it set in motion the thing that ended on the training deck in the next part of this story. Because what happened in that chamber is the reason she stopped enduring. It is the reason the patience finally ran out. Not the insults, not the board, not the name they called her. It was what she saw a system do to the people it was supposed to protect, while everyone in charge insisted that the system was working perfectly. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me catch my breath, the way she taught all of us to catch ours, and I will tell you the rest. For now, hold on to this. Hold on to the smallest cadet in the intake, running her 11th lap on an empty track while the rest of us watched in shame. Hold on to her standing over a furious Vossier she had never struck. Hold on to her looking me dead in the eye while I laughed at her, and choosing, for reasons I still do not fully deserve, not to make me pay for it. She was the Academy's laughingstock. The board said so, the crowd said so, and every chart they knew how to draw agreed. They just hadn't built the chart yet that could measure what she actually was. And on a training deck rated to absorb anything a cadet could throw at it, with her bare, unarmored hand, she was about to draw that chart for them, in a line none of us would ever forget. Let me tell you about the cascade. If you ever meet someone who trained at the academy in those years, say the word to them and watch their face. Watch it change. There are exercises you forget the moment they end, and there are exercises that live in you like a second spine, and the cascade was the second kind. The older cadets did not talk about it the way they talked about the rest of the curriculum. They went quiet when it came up. They said things like, "You will see," and then they would not say any more, and that silence was worse than any warning they could have given us. I did not understand the silence until I was inside it. The cascade was run in the deep sections of the station, below the training deck, below the dormitory rings, in a sealed environment chamber the engineers called the drum. It was a vast cylindrical space they could configure into almost anything, but for the cascade they built a ship corridor, full scale, a long curving passage with bulkhead doors and conduit running along the ceiling and the kind of false windows that show you a planet that is not there. They built it to be real. That was the whole philosophy. The instructors believed, and they were not wrong, that you cannot train a creature to keep its head in a crisis by showing it a clean simulation. The body has to believe. The animal underneath the mind has to believe that it might die, or it will not learn anything that matters. So they made it as real as the law allowed. The premise was a hull breach, mid-transit populated section, a debris strike that opens the outer skin and starts a cascade of failures, which is where the name comes from. One failure feeds the next. The pressure drops. The emergency doors try to seal, and some of them seal wrong, trapping people on the wrong side. There are casualties, played by drones built to look and weigh and bleed like real crew. There is debris on hidden tracks that comes loose at scripted moments. There is a clock, because there is always a clock, and the clock is the real enemy. Everything in the cascade is designed to teach you one lesson that the rest of the curriculum could not. The lesson is that you cannot save everyone. The lesson is that you will have to choose. And the lesson is that the choice will be wrong no matter what you pick, and you will have to make it anyway, and then you will have to live in the after. That is a hard thing to teach a young creature. I understand now why they built the drum to do it. I understand the cruelty was a kind of mercy, a way of letting us fail where failure cost only shame and not lives. I understand all of that now. I did not understand it then. Then I was just afraid. Our cascade group was 12 cadets. I will not list all of them because most of them do not matter to this story, and I will not turn them into props, but 4 of them matter. There was me. There was a Corthan, and yes, it was Brask, because the draws put us together the way the draws always seem to put the wrong creatures together. There was a Thren named Pell, small and nervous and clever, one of the few cadets who had never joined the Laughing, who had once quietly shared rations with Maya when the dispenser misread her dietary code and gave her nothing. And there was Maya Cole. We assembled outside the drum at the start of the cycle. The instructor that term was a coalition veteran named Soren Vex, a Halrid, old by the standards of his species, with the gray crest and the heavy, slow voice of someone who has actually been in the things he is teaching about. Vex was not cruel. I want that on the record. He was not one of the instructors who made the small exhale at Maya's name. He was just certain. He had a certainty that came from surviving real breaches on real ships, and the certainty had hardened over the years into something that could not be questioned. He believed in the drum. He believed in the system. He believed that the exercise was controlled down to the last variable, because he had run it 300 times and it had always been controlled, and 300 is a number that feels like proof when you are standing inside it. He briefed us in his slow, heavy voice. The scenario, the objective, locate the simulated survivors, stabilize what we could, get as many as possible to the safe muster point before the clock ran out and the section was declared lost. He told us the casualties were drones and the debris was tracked and the pressure drop was bounded and monitored, and that at no point, were we in any real danger. He said it the way you say a thing you have said 300 times. He said it the way you stop hearing your own words. And then he said the part that I have turned over in my mind more times than any other part of this whole story. He looked at us, all 12, and he said, "The system will keep you safe. Your job is to act as if it will not." We filed into the drum. The first thing that hit me was the cold. They had dropped the temperature to simulate the heat loss of a breach, and the cold came through my celiac skin like fingers, and I saw the heavy worlders feel it too, saw Brask's hide tight, saw the breath of the warmer species fog in the fall starlight. And I saw Maya in her loose-shouldered uniform not react at all. The cold that was making the rest of us flinch was simply weather to her. Her homeworld, the medical officer told me later, has places where the temperature swings further in a single rotation than the drum had dropped, and her body did not even register it as a threat. She just stood there, breathing slow, that sideways look already moving over the corridor, already reading it, already counting doors. The clock started. For the first few minutes it went the way the briefing said it would. We found the first cluster of survivor drones in a side compartment, 3 of them, and we did what we had drilled, checking and tagging and moving them toward the muster point, and the debris came loose where the debris was supposed to come loose, and we dodged it the way we had been taught, and there was a kind of grim satisfaction building, the satisfaction of a team executing a plan. Even Brask was good at this part. I will give him that. Corthans are built for hauling, and he carried 2 of the survivor drones at once, one over each massive shoulder, and moved them down the corridor with a steadiness that the rest of us could not have matched. In the part of the cascade that was about strength, Brask was exactly what the recruiting reels promised. Maya did the part that was not about strength. She found the survivors. She had a way of reading the corridor that none of the rest of us had, scanning for the small signs, the tagged compartment, the flicker of a drone's status light behind a half-jammed door, and she would point and we would go, and she was right every time. She was not the strongest creature in the drum by a long measure. She was the one who knew where to point the strong creatures, and for a while it worked. For a while the team was a real thing, 12 cadets from a dozen worlds moving as one, and I remember thinking in the warm middle of it that maybe the older cadets had exaggerated. Maybe the cascade was just a hard exercise and not the nightmare they had gone silent about. Then the door failed. I need to be precise about this, because it is the center of everything, and because for years afterward people who were not there told it wrong on purpose. There was a bulkhead door, one of the heavy emergency seals, between the main corridor and a compartment where the scenario had placed 2 more survivor drones. In the script, the door was supposed to be jammed at a half-open position, wide enough for a cadet to squeeze through, simulating a partial seal failure. We were meant to get through the gap, retrieve the drones, and get back out, all of it timed against the clock. The door was not jammed half open. The door was jammed almost fully closed, with a gap barely wide enough to put an arm through. I saw Vex's voice come over the channel, and for the first time in the whole exercise his slow certainty had a hairline crack in it. He told us to leave that compartment. He said the door was a malfunction, a mechanical fault in the drum itself, not part of the scenario, and that we should abandon those 2 survivor drones and proceed to the muster point. It was the right call. It was the safe call. The system had glitched, and the correct response to a glitch is to step back and let the operators fix it. And it would have been fine. It would have been a footnote, a story about the cycle the drum's door stuck, except for one thing the script had not accounted for and the operators could not see from their station. Pell was already through the gap. The Thren, small, nervous, clever Pell, who had shared rations with Maya, who had never laughed at anyone. Pell had squeezed through the barely open door an instant before Vex called the abort, gone in to reach the survivor drones, because Pell was the kind of creature who did the brave thing a half-second before the smart creature told him not to. And now the door, the malfunctioning door, finished what it had started. It ground the rest of the way closed. And it sealed Pell inside the compartment on the wrong side of a half-ton emergency bulkhead, in a section of the drum where the pressure drop simulation was still running, still bounded, still safe. The operators kept saying, still within tolerances. But the tolerances were built for the scenario. They were not built for a cadet trapped alone behind a door that should not have closed, in a falling pressure compartment, with the cold coming through, and the false stars wheeling in the false window and nobody able to reach him. I have heard the operator's account. I have read the report. They did everything right by the procedure. They moved to abort the whole exercise. They began the sequence to repressurize the drum and unlock the doors. But the door's mechanism was the very thing that had failed, and it would not respond to the unlock command, and the abort sequence is not instant. It is a careful stage thing designed to bring 12 cadets safely out of a complex environment, and all of that takes time, and Pell did not have time, because the thing about a falling pressure compartment, even a bounded and monitored one, is that small, clever, nervous creatures with light frames and shallow lung capacity do not tolerate it the way the tolerances assumed. Pell started to fail. We could see him through the gap in the door, through the barely there gap, see him slump against the bulkhead, see his status light go from steady to stuttering. And Vex was shouting now, the certainty gone entirely, shouting at the operators to get the door open, and the operators were shouting back that they were trying. The mechanism was fused, and the abort would take 90 more seconds, and you could hear in everyone's voice the thing nobody would say, which was that 90 seconds was too long. This is the moment. Everything I have told you was leading here. Because while Vex shouted and the operators worked and the rest of us stood frozen in the way young creatures freeze, useless and horrified, 12 trained cadets reduced to spectators, Maya Cole walked to the door. She did not run. I want you to understand that. Everyone always asks if she ran, and she did not. She walked that same controlled pace, the pace of a creature who has decided that panic is a sprint she cannot afford, and she put her hands into the gap, one on each edge of the half-ton bulkhead door, and she looked at Pell through the opening, and then she did the thing. Now here is where I have to be honest about what I actually saw, versus what the legend became. The legend says she ripped the door open with her bare hands like it was paper. That is not what happened. That is the part the legend gets wrong, because the legend wants her to be a monster of strength, and she was not. What she did was harder than that, and stranger than that, and far more human than that. She did not try to overpower the door. She had spent the whole term learning that overpowering was not her gift. Instead, she set her feet, low and wide, in the stance I had seen her use against Het, and she did not pull, she leaned, putting not just her arms into it but her whole body, her legs, her back, every long-evolved muscle her ancestors had built on a homeworld of endless walking and endless lifting and endless not stopping. And she found the exact point where the fused mechanism had its weakness, the way she always found the exact point, and she put a steady, relentless, increasing pressure on it. Not a burst, not an explosion of force like Brask would have used. A wave. A slow-building, unstoppable wave, the surf against the rock, except this time she was the surf and the door was the rock, and she did not stop, she did not stop. She leaned and pushed and her arms shook and the salt water ran down her face and her loose shoulders set into a line that did not change. And the door, the fused half-ton emergency bulkhead, began to move. It moved a finger's width, then a hand's width. The fused mechanism shrieked, metal against metal, and somewhere in the operator's station, an alarm went off because the door was being forced against a sequence that said it could not be forced, and Vex stopped shouting and just stared, and the whole drum went silent except for the shriek of the metal and the sound of Maya Cole breathing. She got it open far enough, just far enough, and then she did the other thing, the thing that mattered as much as the strength, maybe more. She did not climb through to be a hero. She held the door. She braced it with her whole body, holding back half a ton of fused metal that wanted to grind closed again, and she turned her head and she said in that same quiet, flat voice, "Brask, get him. I've got the door." And Brask, the Corthan, the one who had called her a thing that would break its arm on a ration tin, the one who had pointed a baton at her chest, Brask did not hesitate. Whatever he was a soldier in that moment, and a soldier knows the voice of someone who has the situation. He went through the gap she was holding, and he got his huge arms around Pell, and he pulled the small failing Thren back through the opening. And the instant Pell's body cleared the door, Maya let it go, and it ground the rest of the way shut behind them with a sound like the end of the world. Pell lived. The medical team that flooded into the drum the moment the abort finally completed got to him in time, barely, and Pell lived, and recovered, and is alive somewhere right now as I tell you this, with a family of his own. And I do not think a single member of that family knows that the only reason Pell exists to have raised them is that a creature everyone called the Laughingstock leaned on a door that the system swore could not be moved. You would think that would be the end of the joke. You would think that would be the moment everything changed, the music swelling, the crowd lifting her onto their shoulders. It was not, and the reason it was not is the real heart of this part of the story, and it is the thing that finally broke Maya Cole's endless patience, and I need you to sit with it the way I have had to sit with it for all these years. Because the Academy could not afford for what happened in the drum to be true. Think about it from their side. The cascade was the crown of the curriculum. Its entire value, its entire philosophy rested on one promise, that it was controlled, that the danger was always simulated, the tolerances always held, the system always kept the cadets safe while teaching them to act as if it would not. Soren Vex had said it himself at the briefing. The system will keep you safe. And the system had not. The system had jammed a door it swore could not jam, trapped a cadet it swore could not trap, and very nearly killed him in a falling pressure compartment that the tolerances swore was safe. The only thing that had kept the cascade from producing an actual dead cadet, the first in the Academy's history, was an act of physical capability that the Academy's own evaluations had ranked at the absolute bottom of the intake. If that got out, the cascade was finished. The philosophy was finished. The certainty that men like Vex had built their whole careers on was finished. And more than that, more dangerously than that, it raised a question the Coalition was not ready to ask. If the weakest creature in the intake, by every chart the Academy knew how to draw, could move a half-ton door that the system declared immovable, then the charts were wrong. Not slightly wrong. Wrong at the root. And if the charts about strength were that wrong, what else were they wrong about? What else had the Coalition decided about humans, about who they were and what they could do and where they belonged, based on evaluations that measured the wrong thing entirely? So the Academy did what large frightened systems always do. It wrote a report that protected itself. The official account of the drum incident was a small miracle of careful language. It acknowledged a mechanical anomaly in a bulkhead door. It praised the exemplary teamwork of the Cascade Group in responding to the anomaly. It noted that cadets cooperated to free the affected trainee. It commended Cadet Brask by name for physically extracting the at-risk cadet under pressure. And it did not mention Maya Cole at all. Not once. Her name appeared nowhere in the document except in the roster of the group. The thing she had done, the impossible thing, the door, was folded into a passive phrase about cadets cooperating, and the credit for the extraction, the visible heroic part, the part that photographed well, was given to the Corthan who had carried Pell those final meters. It was not even a lie exactly. That is the genius and the horror of it. Brask had carried Pell. That part was true. The report simply declined to mention who had held the door, who had moved the door, who had made Brask's heroism possible. It let the natural assumptions do the rest. Of course it was the big strong Corthan who saved the day. Of course it was not the small soft human at the bottom of the board. The report did not have to lie. It only had to leave a gap, the way the door had left a gap, and let everyone's existing certainty squeeze through it. And the cadets believed it because the cadets wanted to believe it. Brask the hero fit the story they already knew. Maya the secret savior did not. Within a few cycles, the drum incident had become another piece of evidence for the joke, because in the retelling, in the version that spread through the bunks, Maya had frozen. She had been one of the useless spectators. It was Brask who acted. It was Brask who saved Pell. The Laughingstock had stood there and watched, the way everyone always knew she would when it really mattered. I heard a cadet say that. I heard a cadet who had not even been in the drum say, with total confidence, I heard the human just froze. Brask had to do everything. And the cadet who said it was not lying. He believed it. The report had told him what to believe, and he believed it. And the truth, the actual truth that I had watched with my own eyes from 4 meters away, had been quietly deleted from the record by people who found it too dangerous to be true. I almost said something. I want you to know that I came close. I stood in that commons with the false certainty washing over me, and I felt the truth pushing up in my throat, and I came so close to saying, no, I was there, that is not what happened. She moved the door, I saw her move the door. And I did not. I swallowed it. Again. Because the current was strong, and because Brask was popular, and because contradicting the official report would have made me a target. And I was 15 and far from home, and I had a placement my whole parent line had bled for. And I told myself it was not my fight, and I let the lie stand. That is twice now in this story that I have told you about my own cowardice. I am not going to apologize for telling you. The story does not work without it. You need to understand that Maya Cole was surrounded by creatures like me. Not villains. Not the cruel ones like Brask. Just ordinary, frightened young creatures who knew the truth and chose comfort over it, over and over, until the lie became the air she breathed. And here is the thing I did not understand until much later, the thing that finally explains the deck. Maya did not care that they gave Brask the credit. I know that sounds impossible, but I came to understand it, and it is the key to everything. She did not care about the credit because she had never been doing it for credit. She had pushed that door because Pell was dying behind it and she could move it, and so she moved it. And whether the report mentioned her name was as meaningless to her as whether the board ranked her endurance run. She had a strange and total indifference to the verdict of the system. The system's opinion of her was simply not information she found useful. What she could not let go of, what finally broke her, was something else entirely. It was the report's other effect, because the report did not just erase Maya. By erasing what had really happened, it protected the cascade. It declared the system sound. It said in its careful self-protecting language that the anomaly was handled, the tolerances held, the philosophy was vindicated, the cascade would continue exactly as before. And that meant the next group of cadets would go into the drum believing the same promise Vex had made us. The system will keep you safe. And the door, the fused door, the malfunctioning mechanism that the report had downgraded to a handled anomaly, would still be there. Maybe it would hold next time. Maybe it would not. But the cadets going in would not know, because the truth of how close Pell had come had been deleted to protect the certainty of men who could not afford to be wrong. The next group could die, and they would die believing the system that killed them was keeping them safe. And the people who ran that system would write another careful report and find another convenient hero, and the certainty would roll on, because the alternative, admitting that the charts were wrong, that the whole structure of how they measured and ranked and judged was built on a foundation that a small human had just leaned a half-ton door off of, was simply too large and too frightening for the system to survive. That was what broke her patience. Not the joke, not the board, not the lie about Brask. It was the realization that her silence, the endless graceful patience that I had so admired, was itself part of the machine. That by enduring quietly, by letting the charts be wrong, by never forcing the system to see what it refused to see, she was protecting the very certainty that would one day get a cadet killed. She had spent the whole term being the rock the surf broke against, and she finally understood that being a rock was not enough. The rock endures the sea, but the rock changes nothing. The sea keeps coming. The cadets keep going into the drum. And someday the door does not open, and a small, clever, nervous creature like Pell dies behind it, and the report calls it an anomaly that was handled. To change something, she could not be the rock anymore. She had to be the wave. I did not know any of this was happening inside her. None of us did. From the outside, she looked exactly the same in the cycles after the drum. Same loose shoulders, same tied-back hair, same sideways glance, same flat indifference to the board that still parked her name at the bottom. She took the renewed joke about freezing in the drum with the same patience she had taken everything else. If you had looked at her in those cycles, you would have seen the Laughingstock, unchanged, enduring. But something had shifted underneath, in the deep place where she made her long, slow decisions, the place none of us could see. She had run her endurance race all the way to the end of it. She had reached the line where patience stops being a virtue and starts being a kind of complicity. And she had decided in that quiet inner chamber that she was done enduring. She was going to make them see. Not for herself. She had no pride left to satisfy. She was going to make them see because the next group of cadets was going to walk into the drum trusting a system that had nearly killed Pell. And the only way to break that trust open, the only way to force the coalition to look at the rotten foundation under all its certainty, was to do something so undeniable, so impossible to fold into a careful passive report, so utterly beyond the reach of the charts, that no convenient lie could absorb it. She needed to do it in front of everyone. She needed to do it where there were too many witnesses to erase, too many recordings to delete, too many instructors and cadets and visiting officers to all be told the same comforting falsehood. She needed a stage. And the academy, as it happened, had built her the perfect one. A wide circular floor 60 meters across, ringed by an observation gallery, the most watched space in the entire station. A floor made of layered ferrolaminate rated to absorb anything a cadet could throw at it. The immovable thing. The floor of the world. The very deck they had dropped a 2-ton drone onto in our first week to prove that nothing we could ever do would so much as mark it. She was going to draw them a new chart. And she was going to draw it on the one surface in the whole academy that everyone, every cadet and instructor and certain old veteran, absolutely believed could not be drawn on. When I tell you what happened on that deck, in the final part of this story, you will understand why 40 years later I am still telling it, and why the people who hear it still say it cannot be true. You will understand the line she said when it was over, the line that got the Eastern Combat Hall renamed, the line I have never been able to repeat without my voice doing something I cannot control. But that is the last part. For now, sit with this. Sit with a small creature who saved a life through a door the world swore was sealed, and watched the world hand the credit to someone else, and felt nothing about it, because she had stopped caring what the world thought of her a long time ago. Sit with her making the quiet, terrible, generous decision that the only way to protect the cadets who came after her was to stop being patient, to stop being the rock, to become the wave that finally broke the certainty in half. I will tell you how she did it, and I will tell you, finally, the part where I stopped being a coward, because I was on that gallery, and what I did up there in the last seconds before her bare hand came down is the only thing in this whole story I have ever been proud of. The day it happened was not a training day. That is the first thing people get wrong when they retell it. They imagine some heated sparring match, Maya pushed past her limit, lashing out. It was nothing like that. The day it happened was a ceremony, and that detail matters more than almost any other, because she chose it. She chose the one day when the people who could actually change something would be standing in the gallery looking down. The coalition had sent an oversight delegation. This was a routine thing in theory, a senior board that toured the training stations every few years to confirm the curriculum was sound, and the methods were within regulation. But this particular visit was not entirely routine, because the drum incident had reached them, in its careful sanitized form, the version with the mechanical anomaly that was handled, and the exemplary teamwork and the brave Corthan who carried the trapped cadet to safety. The delegation had read the report, and they had decided, in the way that institutions decide these things, that the drum incident was a perfect opportunity, not a crisis to investigate, an opportunity to celebrate. So they built a ceremony around it, on the training deck. I have thought a great deal about the cruelty of that choice, though I do not believe anyone intended it as cruelty. They wanted to show the delegation that the Academy produced not just capable soldiers but heroes, that even when the system glitched, the cadets it forged rose to meet the moment. And the centerpiece of the ceremony, the proof of all this, was going to be a formal commendation of Cadet Brask of the Corthan people, for valor in the rescue of a fellow cadet during the Cascade exercise. They were going to pin a real coalition citation on him, in front of the delegation, in front of the entire intake, on the most watched floor in the station. They were going to make the lie permanent. They were going to carve it into the official history of the coalition, where it would outlive every one of us, where Pell's grandchildren would one day read it and learn that a Corthan had saved their grandparent, and never know the truth. And Maya Cole was going to have to stand in the gallery and watch. The whole intake was assembled, 400 cadets ringing the observation gallery, looking down into the pit of the training deck. The delegation stood on a raised section at the head of the gallery, 6 senior officers in the deep gray of Coalition Command, and among them an Eldoran admiral named Ceres Vaughn, who I would later learn was the most senior officer to visit the Academy in a generation. Soren Vex stood with them, the old halrid, his gray crest catching the blue-gray light. His slow, heavy certainty fully restored after the scare of the drum. The report had vindicated him. The system was sound. He believed it again, all the way down. Brask stood alone on the deck below, in dress uniform, waiting to be called forward and elevated. I was in the gallery near the rail, maybe 11 meters from the spot where it would happen. I remember the exact distance because I have measured it in my mind 10,000 times since. I was standing next to Pell, actually. The Thren had recovered fully by then, was back in the rotation, and Pell stood at the rail beside me, and I could feel that Pell was unhappy, vibrating with a quiet wrongness, and I knew why. And Pell knew that I knew why, and neither of us said anything because we were both cowards in our own ways, and the ceremony was beginning. And what could 2 cadets do against a coalition delegation and an official report? Admiral Vaughn spoke. I will not pretend to remember the words. They were the words such occasions always use: courage, excellence, the finest traditions, the way the Academy turns ordinary young people into extraordinary defenders of the coalition. And then the Admiral gestured, and an aide stepped forward with the citation, and Vex's slow voice called out the name of Cadet Brask, and Brask took a step toward the raised section to receive the honor for a thing he had not done alone, for a door he had not moved, for a life he had carried only the last few meters of. And a voice from the gallery said, "No." It was not loud. That is the thing nobody believes. It was not a shout. It was that same flat, quiet voice I had heard threaten to be careful not to break a Corthan, the same voice that had said, "Brask, get him. I've got the door." It carried across the whole silent hall not because it was loud but because everything else had gone so still, and 400 heads turned, and the delegation turned, and Soren Vex turned, and they all found the source of it, and it was the smallest cadet in the intake, the Laughingstock, standing at the gallery rail with her loose shoulders and her tied-back hair, and that sideways look already gone from her face, replaced by something straight and level and final. Maya Cole had decided to become the wave. What happened next happened fast in real time and has played out slow in my memory ever since. Vex demanded to know the meaning of the interruption. There were murmurs, the beginning of that current of cruel laughter that always rose around her, because of course it was the Laughingstock, of course she would humiliate herself one last time. And Maya did not argue, did not explain, did not make a case. She had learned long ago that arguing was a sprint she would lose. Instead she walked. Down the gallery steps, onto the deck itself, into the pit, into the most watched space in the station, with 400 cadets and 6 coalition officers and one certain old Howard watching her come. And she walked to the center of the deck and she stopped, and she looked up at the delegation, at Admiral Vaughn, and she said the only thing she said before she did it. She said, "Your report is wrong, and I'm tired of letting it be." Vex started to order her removed. I saw 2 proctors begin to move along the gallery toward the steps, and Maya, ignoring all of it, knelt down on one knee on the ferrolaminate deck, the immovable deck, the deck they had dropped a 2-ton drone onto in our first week to prove that nothing a cadet could ever do would mark it. She placed her left hand flat against the surface, palm down, fingers spread, and she was still for a moment, the way she had been still at the door, finding the point, reading the floor the way she read everything, finding the one place where the immovable thing was not quite as immovable as it believed. And then she lifted her right hand, bare, unarmored, the hand of a creature that the charts had ranked dead last in strength. I have heard the engineers explain it since, and I will give you their explanation, because the truth is better than the legend and I have spent 40 years choosing the truth. The ferrolaminate was rated to absorb impact, distributed impact. A 2-ton drone dropping flat onto 60 meters of floor spreads its force across the whole surface, and the layered composite, the alloy and the energy-dispersing gel and the ceramic skin, drinks it up exactly as designed. That is what it was built for. That is the only thing it was ever tested against. But every material has a grain, a seam, a direction along which it is strong and a direction along which it is not, and the ferrolaminate had a weakness that no test had ever found because no creature in the coalition had ever been able to exploit it. To break it, you did not need more force than a drone. You needed less force, applied to exactly the right point, in exactly the right direction, along the hidden seam between 2 plates, and held and held and held, past the moment when any normal striking creature's hand would have shattered, past the moment when any normal creature's muscles would have failed, building the focused load past the point of any burst, until the composite's hidden grain finally let go. It required 3 things at once. It required knowing the point, which was Maya's gift, the same gift that had let her read the corridor and find the door's weakness. It required the raw capacity to deliver real force, which everyone said she did not have, and which she did have, just not in the explosive form the charts measured. And it required the one thing the charts had never even thought to look for, the thing the medical officer had named for me long after. It required the capacity to not stop. To apply force past the point where stopping is the only sane choice. To keep a hand pressed into a breaking surface through pain that would make a Corthan pull back and a Vossier cry out, because somewhere in the deep history of her species, on a homeworld of brutal distances and endless pursuit, her ancestors had been the ones who simply did not stop. She brought her bare right hand down onto the deck. Not a wild blow, a precise one, onto the exact point her left hand had found. And then she did the thing she had done to the door, the thing she had done to Het, the thing that was the whole truth of her. She did not strike and recoil. She struck and stayed and pressed, the wave, the surf, the building, unstoppable load, her whole body coming down through her arm into that one point on the seam, her shoulders setting into the line that did not change, the salt water already on her face, and the deck, the immovable deck, the floor of the world, made a sound. It was a sound I had never heard before and have never heard since. A deep structural groan, felt before it was heard, a vibration that came up through the gallery rail and into my hands the way the ring of the door had, except this was bigger. This was the whole floor. This was 60 meters of composite that had drunk a 2-ton drop without a mark, now speaking in a register of pure protest. The gallery went from murmuring to dead silent in the space of a heartbeat. Brask, forgotten, citation forgotten, stood frozen at the edge of the deck. Admiral Von leaned forward. Vex's gray crest had gone rigid. And the deck split. It started at her hand and it ran. A crack, a real crack, racing along the hidden seam she had found, opening across the immovable floor like the surface of a frozen lake giving way, traveling outward in both directions from the point of her palm, a fracture line that crossed meter after meter of the deck that nothing a cadet could do was supposed to mark, until it reached the far edges and the whole floor settled with a final shuddering crunch into two pieces. Split. The training deck, split in half by a bare hand, in front of the entire intake and a coalition delegation, and the most senior officer to visit in a generation. Then there was the silence, the longest silence of my life. Maya Cole stood up. She was breathing hard now, the only sign of what it had cost her, and her right hand was a ruin, the skin split, her own blood bright on the gray composite, and she did not look at it. She looked up at the delegation, at Admiral Vaughn, and in that flat, quiet voice that the whole hall could now hear because nobody in the universe was making any other sound, she said the thing that had been building inside her since the drum. She said, "You measured the wrong thing. You measured what we can do in a second. You never measured what we can do when we decide not to stop." She paused. Her blood was dripping onto the broken deck. "A door like the one in the drum is going to jam again, and the next group is going to believe your report because you told them the system keeps them safe. I held that door, not him." She did not point at Brask. She did not even look at him. "He carried Pell the last 3 meters, and he did it well, and he deserves to be honored for it. But the report says cadets cooperated, and that's a lie of the convenient kind, the kind that lets you keep believing your charts. I didn't break your floor to win anything. I broke it because it was the only thing in this whole station you all believed couldn't be broken. And now you can't write a report that says it didn't happen. 400 people just watched. So now you have to ask the question you've been afraid of. If the charts are this wrong about the floor, what else are they wrong about?" And then she did the most Maya thing of all. She did not wait for an answer. She did not bask. She turned and walked toward the gallery steps, leaving her blood on the broken deck behind her, the way she had always walked away from the board, that controlled unhurried pace, a creature who had finished her race and had nothing left to prove to anyone. Here is the part I am proud of, the only part. The proctors were still moving toward her. There was a half-second, a hanging moment, where the whole thing could still have been swallowed. Where Vex could have ordered her detained for damaging Academy property and reckless conduct. Where the delegation could have been hustled away, and a new report could have begun forming in the institutional mind. A report about an unstable cadet who vandalized a training surface during a ceremony. A report that would have used different convenient words to bury the same inconvenient truth. The system is very good at this. It almost always finds a way. The lie was already reaching for its second draft. And I opened my mouth. I let go of the gallery rail and I heard my own voice come out of me, too loud, cracking. A Selleck voice that had laughed at her in a strength evaluation crowd and laughed at her in an equipment bay and swallowed the truth in a commons not once but every single time it mattered, and I said, "She's telling the truth." I was in the drum. I was 4 meters away. She moved the door. I watched her move the door and I watched the report leave her name out and I said nothing. Her name is Maya Cole, and she moved the door. And then Pell beside me, small recovered Pell whose life she had saved, said in a shaking voice, "I'm only alive because she moved it. I was on the other side. I saw her hands come through." And then a Vossier 3 places down the rail, Het, the one she had put on the deck 4 times without ever throwing a strike, said, "She beat me with my own speed and the scoring system called it a draw. She's right. You're measuring the wrong thing." And it broke open. Once the first voice goes, once the first coward stops being a coward, the dam does not hold. All down the gallery, cadets who had laughed at her, cadets who had repeated the lie about her freezing in the drum, cadets who had needed her to be at the bottom so they could feel safe in the middle, they began to speak. Not all of them. The Academy was not transformed into a chorus of the noble, but enough. Enough voices, enough witnesses, 400 of us, and a delegation that could not unhear it, until there was no possible report that could make it not have happened, until the truth had too many mouths to be deleted from the record. Admiral Vaughn held up a hand for silence and got it, and looked down at the broken deck for a long moment, and then looked at Maya Cole standing at the foot of the gallery steps with her ruined hand. And the Admiral did the thing that, in the end, separates an officer worth following from a system protecting itself. The Admiral said quietly, "I think the board has some questions for the cadet, and some questions for itself." That was the beginning of the end of the joke, and the beginning of a great many other things. I will not pretend it all changed in a day, because it did not. Systems are slow and proud, and they do not enjoy admitting their charts are wrong. There were inquiries. There was an honest investigation into the drum, a real one this time, that found the door mechanism had a flaw that would have failed again, that the tolerances for falling pressure compartments had never accounted for light-frame species, that the original report had been written to protect the cascade rather than to find the truth. The door was redesigned. The tolerances were rewritten. Soren Vex, to his enormous credit, the old Howrid with the slow, heavy certainty, sat in front of that investigation and said plainly that he had believed in a system that had nearly killed a cadet, and that his certainty had been a kind of negligence, and that he was sorry. It cost him. Certainty is the only thing some old soldiers have. He gave his up in front of a board, for the truth, and I have never respected anyone more for a thing they said with their voice shaking. And the charts changed. Not overnight, but they changed. The coalition went back and looked at how it measured cadets, all cadets, every species, and found that it had been measuring explosive output and calling it strength, measuring landed strikes and calling it skill, measuring all the things that photographed well and none of the things that actually kept people alive when the door jammed and the pressure dropped and the clock ran out. They built new charts, charts for endurance, for the capacity to apply force over time, for the gift of reading a situation and knowing where to point the strong creatures, for the refusal to stop. Maya Cole's name moved up that board, the one that had parked her at the bottom for the whole term, and it did not stop moving up, and by the end she was not at the bottom of the intake. She was not at the top either, because she did not care about the top, and the new charts were honest enough to show that too. But she was never the Laughingstock again. Nobody ever called her that again. The name died on the broken deck and it stayed dead. They left the deck broken for a long time, actually. That was Admiral Vaughn's order. Do not repair it yet. Let the cadets train around the crack. Let them see it. And new intakes would arrive and ask what happened to the floor, and the older cadets would tell them. And the silence the older cadets had once used about the cascade became a different kind of silence, a respectful one, the silence you use about a thing that is true and large and changed something. When they finally did repair it, years later, they did not hide the seam. They marked it, a thin line of brighter metal across the deck from edge to edge where the crack had run, and beside it, set into the floor, a small plate. And when they renamed the Eastern Combat Hall, they did not name it for a battle or a general. They named it the Coal Hall, and most of the cadets who train there now have no idea that the small human it is named for once ran her 11th lap on an empty track, while the whole station watched her in shame. Maya graduated. She served. I will not tell you the rest of her career because it is hers and not mine, and because some of it is still classified, and because this story is not about what she became. It is about what she was before anyone knew, when she was the smallest creature in the intake, and the board said she was nothing, and every chart they knew how to draw agreed. I saw her once years after. At a coalition function, both of us older, both of us in uniform, the long way from a training station orbiting a dead gas giant. I had become someone by then. I had done some things I am not ashamed of, and I crossed the room to her, through all the officers and the noise, because I had been carrying something for a very long time, and I stood in front of her and I made myself say it. I said I laughed at you. In the strength crowd. In the equipment bay. I knew the truth about the drum and I swallowed it. I was a coward, for almost the whole time I knew you, right up until the deck, and I have never forgiven myself for how long it took me to open my mouth. And Maya Cole looked at me with that same level look, no anger in it, never any anger in it, and she was quiet for a moment, The way she was always quiet before she said the thing that mattered. And then she said the line. The one I have never been able to repeat without my voice doing something I cannot control. The one I will leave you with, because there is nothing I could put after it. She said, the ones who laugh aren't the problem, Tavin. The ones who laugh stop when they're shown the truth. The problem was always the ones who saw the truth and built a report around it. She let that sit. Then softer, the closest she ever came to kindness about it. You stopped being a coward at 11 meters with 400 people who outranked you when it could have cost you everything. Most people never stop at all. Don't carry it. You opened your mouth. That's the whole job. That was always the whole job. I have told this story maybe 40 times now, and every time someone says it cannot be true, no creature that small could do what you are describing, I tell them what I told you at the start. I was there. I stood 11 meters away. I felt it in my chest plate before I understood it with my eyes. They never measured the right thing. They measured what she could do in a second. They never thought to measure what she could do when she decided not to stop.